So I'm very excited to announce this next speaker. I had the privilege of listening to her speak at the Women and Minorities in Technology event that was held here in Jacksonville back in February. Sherri Hammons, from her role as a senior executive at PaySimple and Abacus DoubleClick, as well as her being a CTO for Colorado's Office of Information Technology, to her current role as CTO for Beeline and IQ Navigator. She's going to give a great presentation. I'm putting a lot of pressure on you, by the way. But let's go ahead and give her a big round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Oh, the pressure, the pressure. Thank you very much. Well, it's great to see everybody here. I don't always get to speak in front of a bunch of geeks, so I'm really excited about it. I love the shirts, the t-shirts that are all the same. I think that's really cool. I do want to say that since everybody else has been plugging, we're Beeline and we are recruiting too, so we're, you know. Anyway, but I want to give you a little bit of insight into some artificial intelligence, and my goal for you is that when you leave here, you want to think a little bit differently. And I realize that I am the only one standing between you and adult beverages. So my whole goal here is to be quick, to make you think, and I hope tonight over those adult beverages you'll maybe think a little bit differently. That's really my goal here. So a little about me. And I know this, in a room full of, I actually repurposed this slide. And I've used it before, and people normally just look up at you and they kind of start drooling like that just doesn't make any sense to me. But I figure most of you are probably going like, I'm going to just double check that her text to binary is working correctly. Right? Well, my name is Sherri Hammons, and I want to give you a little bit of my background because I think it's probably relevant to the conversation. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma, and I wanted to leave as quickly as I could. As you might imagine, and I graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a business degree, and then I ran off and I joined a band, and I was actually a musician for about 8 years professionally, and I had a total blast, and most of that I can't talk about in this kind of company, but I was a musician for about 8 years, and then I realized that I was, first of all, I'm poor, I have no insurance, and I'm about 29, and I was having probably a midlife crisis, if you will, because I was in a very creative industry. And I loved what I did, but I couldn't really make a living at it. So I decided to go back to school, and my mom was actually the one that said, you should try software engineering. And I took a class at it, and I fell in love with coding. And I know it's kind of the unkept secret for all of us technology people, is that it's a really super creative industry. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that. They think, we're just a bunch of geeks that do, zeros and ones, but it's actually, you have to actually be really creative. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we probably need to start thinking about our industry a little bit differently. And I think artificial intelligence is going to have an impact there. So when I was, I kind of quickly, after I graduated with a degree in computer science, wound up at a company called Abacus, which was a data company, basically, an analytic company, if you will. And back then, it was like so long ago, we just called it data, but today you'd probably call it big data, because we had a lot of data and we did a lot of analytics on it. So I was very well-versed in statistical analysis, and we had we wouldn't call them data scientists then, but we had a lot of data scientists on our team, and so I actually ran that department for a little while as I was also coding, et cetera. And we were quickly, probably a couple years into my tenure there, purchased by a company called DoubleClick. And you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with DoubleClick. It was sold to Google. I was actually there for all of that transaction. In fact, I knew Dwight Merriman, who was the CTO for DoubleClick, who started MongoDB. He and I actually stay in touch. He made hundreds of millions of dollars, and I bought a really nice Jaguar convertible with my money. And he made a couple of $100 million. But anyway, it's not that I'm bitter or anything. But anyway, so as I was there, so what started to happen, was we were streaming data, and we were streaming so much data that nobody really knew what to do with it. And so a lot of the big data tools that you have today came from that era. And I remember talking to those guys when we were trying to figure out, there was all this new data coming, all this clickstream data. There was no really end to it. It just kind of kept streaming in. And we were literally trying to, what the hell do we do with it? So we were trying to even figure out how do you cut it off so that you can actually, move it and archive it off. I mean, it was just, the data problems that we had were super transformational for how we, are dealing with a lot of stuff today, right? And so I was kind of on that forefront, and I've always been super passionate, if you can't tell, about how we take data and how we transform our world. Now, I love this, and I know I have a lot of Beeliners in here, and you guys have heard me say this, probably ad nauseum. In fact, I think I see Mike Cleary getting a little bit sick. But there's nothing more simple in the world than the Google interface. It's a text box. It's been a text box since Google came into play. And I bet you if we sat here, we could probably sit here for the rest of my 45 minutes or whatever it is they're going to take, and we could talk about how many industries Google has disrupted. You don't go to the library anymore. You research everything online. If you want to look up your airline ticket, is my airline on time? Where is it going to actually land? It's contextual. It knows who I am. It knows where I am. And it's one freaking text box, and it's been a text box like that for decades, right? Pretty powerful stuff. And so what's behind it is a lot of artificial intelligence, right? A lot of machine learning, a lot of stuff, and a lot of really, really super smart people that I used to work with at DoubleClick, and hundreds of millions of dollars went into their pockets, if I'm not bitter about that. But no, but I mean so you can make things simple, right? I mean, I think that's one thing that we do as an industry. A lot of times we try to make things really, really hard. And we need to start thinking in terms of very much simplicity. And if you can't, and I know I tell my product team this all the time, if you can't put it in a search box, or if you can't say it to Alexa or Google Home, I'm not sure I'm that interested in doing it, if you can't have a conversation like that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's, to me, this is the pinnacle of one of the most perfect UIs in the history of mankind. It's one simple text box, and it's all powered by data. You guys know, I mean, we're all wearing Fitbits, we're all wearing, I have my watch this morning, and as I was going for a run, the air conditioning, I know you guys know, is out in our rooms, right? And I got up this morning, and I got in at 2 a.m. last night. It was really late, and I woke up and I thought, God, it's really hot here. And I went for a run, and my poor little, heartbeat was just going like crazy. And that's actually just a complete segue. I don't even know why I told you that. But but there's just a lot of data that we're gathering every day, right? I mean, what happens when we're actually, every ear of corn in the world has a sensor on it and can tell you, I need water, I need some kind of food, those kind of things. That's what's happening to our world. So the problem that DoubleClick had with all this streaming data coming in is just going to expand exponentially, as we know, right? And what are we going to do with all that data? I do have some ideas, but that'll be perhaps another conference, in another lecture. But so we all are familiar with this. We all know that things are happening. So what are we going to do about it? So let's talk about a real life example, and I'll give you this is where I'm hoping to kind of blow your mind a little bit. Let's talk about autonomous cars for a little while. So as geeks, we're probably all embracing autonomous cars. I think it's going to probably be, the data says, probably within 8 years or so, regulation has to catch up with autonomous cars, and so does a lot of the industries have to catch up. But they will. I mean, I do believe that they will. But there's a lot of angst around autonomous cars. I know a lot of people that say, I'll never use an autonomous car, and then there are other people that say, I can't wait for it, right? But let's just assume over the course of the next 5 to 10 years that about 50% of us decide that we like autonomous cars. We think that's pretty cool. Let's talk about the economic impact of that. So for instance, let's say right now I own a BMW and I love to drive. I think it's really cool. But I don't really know that I need a car payment. And I don't know that I really need, that I really do care that much about my car. So what happens if I don't need a car anymore? Well, I can recoup my garage, so I can actually have more real estate. I can put my gym in it or whatever. When autonomous cars don't need to park and they can drive 24/7 by 365, what does that mean to parking garages? A lot of people park at the airport. There's a lot of income that comes to airports because of the parking. What happens downtown New York? There's a lot of parking garages there that maybe you don't need anymore, or you need 50% of them. What happens to city taxes when you don't have a parking spot anymore and you're not feeding the meter anymore? There's a lot of economic implications just in the fact that those autonomous cars don't need to park anywhere. They can just run around for 24/7 by 365. They don't need to even stop, really, necessarily. What does that mean to the car manufacturers? let's see. Okay, do we need BMWs anymore? Do we need Mercedes anymore? Does anybody care about their Honda anymore? They're going to consolidate, I can tell you that. There's going to be a massive consolidation of the car manufacturers. And at that point, what do they become? They become services, right? I've now got Sherri Hammons in my car, in the autonomous car, and she doesn't have to look for traffic. She doesn't have to really think about it, which is probably good because I'm not a big thinker, if you can tell. But the cars themselves can change, right? All of a sudden, you can have a service in that car. I'm captive for 45 minutes every day going to work. I'm in an autonomous car. I don't have to do anything, right? I'm sitting there. What if I just got a manicure or a pedicure in my car on the way to work? What if my car brought me breakfast and I could have a nice breakfast on my way to work? So now all of a sudden, do you even need the car to look like it did before? What if it's just now all of a sudden my own little cubicle that I can have on my way to work? So it's one thing that artificial intelligence and machine learning has made one capability, and it will change economically our world. Think about that. Amazon Alexa is, again, my product team. God bless them. If you work for me, you probably want a drink, is my guess. But Amazon and Google Home, conversational ways to talk these days, right? I have both at home because I like to test them out. And I can tell you that at any given moment, I think Google Home is smarter than Alexa, and then I think Alexa is smarter than Google Home. So they're all catching up. I would say that they're kind of in the toddler phase. They're not that great yet. But they're going to get really, really good. And so that conversation, that looks a lot like that search bar, if you think about it. You're interacting by searching, by saying some kind of conversational thing. And that's going to get more and more interesting. Let's say if I start to use it in business, do I really need to go to the office anymore if I can just say, hey, Alexa, give me my top 10 emails, let's talk through it, send Mike Cleary a nasty gram because he missed his deadline for a deployment. No, tell him he's awesome. No, but I mean, if I can work, then are there repercussions that could potentially happen with the office as businesses start to, adopt these conversational things? Do I really need to be in the office all the time? Do I really need to have, a UI in front of me, or a monitor in front of me for a lot of the things that I'm going to be doing? And so I think that there's a lot of impact that can happen with the new ways that we're going to be working. And we need to start thinking about it as an industry, because that's going to be very, very impactful for how we build software. Let's talk about ourselves. From an industry perspective, how are we going to use artificial intelligence and machine learning? We write a lot of bugs. I don't know. I used to write a lot of bugs. You guys probably are great, but I used to write a ton of bugs. And I can guarantee you that I'm probably the only person who was the chief technology officer for the state of Colorado who took down the state network for about a day. Thank you. Yes, it was epic. It was on the front page of the paper. It was epic. And there's nothing like, the governors are always proud of you when that happens, right? No, but but so what do you do with bugs? I mean, that's the most mundane thing we do, right? It's a very creative industry. We've already talked about that, right? So if we want to be creative, we want to write software. We want to make people's lives better. We want to, do really cool stuff. I don't want to sit there and look for a bug for 2 days. I mean, and we do it, right? Why don't we start to think about artificial intelligence and machine learning about making our lives better? Why can't we figure out? There's a whole bunch of code on GitHub. And there's a whole bunch of bugs that we know about probably internally. Why don't we start using some of the tools that are out there and big data tools to go start helping ourselves, What about putting together frameworks? If I'm going to start building something new and I want to be creative with it, what about, some artificial intelligence to go figure out what frameworks should I be using? You can package them up in this way, We need to start getting smarter ourselves rather than making everybody else smarter. So I think there's a lot we can do. And that we should be thinking about as an industry. But there are some cautionary tales here. And if this next thing doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. So Putin says, the nation who leads AI will rule the world. And if that doesn't, he said it, and if that doesn't scare you, based on what's going on in the world, It should, right? It should wake us up. You know, whether or not you believe everything that you read in the paper, which I know not all of us do, but there probably has been some tampering somewhere. There has been some attempt at changing the way that we view the world. Facebook actually tried to change some of the, on your home page at time, they tried to change some of the information that they were giving you to see if they could change your mood. I don't know if you guys remember that. Now that's pretty scary on some level when you think about it. And so artificial intelligence is powering that. Could they change the way that we think about our government and democracy? Could it change the way I think about my partner? What are the things that can happen there? So there's a lot of cautionary things that we have to happen. And guess what? Government is going to have to be in the forefront of that. And how's that going to change the way we think about government? Robots, you know, and I know as an industry we're not as concerned about robots because we know what they can do and we're excited about it, but a lot of people think about robots like that. And so what I do believe is going to happen is that we're going to work side by side with robots. And we're already seeing a lot of that, right? A lot of the impact of how robots can take the mundane stuff away and can actually help us. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the medical field where now there's certain anesthesiologists that can actually have 5 surgeries going at once because of robotics and sensors. And so what economic impact does that have with the medical field? Maybe you don't need as many anesthesiologists anymore, right? I mean, what is that going to happen? You know, how's that going to affect certain things? Maybe it drives our medical bills down. I mean, that could be good, right? There could be a lot of impact there, but you know, so we have to start thinking about how we can work side by side with computers and how they can do things for us that make our lives better, that maybe make us more productive. But I personally don't believe that the Terminator's coming in through that door at any moment. Pete, just watch out for that door if the Terminator actually comes in. But I do think that there's a whole lot of work that's going to be done, and I think robots are going to actually play a really big role for us. And AI is a part of that. I mean, there's a big AI play there. Let's go back to Amazon. So I was talking to this woman who's writing a book a few weeks ago. And we were talking a little bit about the impact and the kind of the ethics around some of the stuff that's going on in artificial intelligence, et cetera. And one thing that I said, and I hadn't thought about it before, but I said, you know, what about the impact to kids who are using Alexa and Google Home now, and they don't have to say please. They don't have to say thank you anymore, right? I mean, I don't ask, I say, Alexa, what time is it? Bitch. I mean, right? I mean, you know, she's not, I don't really do that because she might actually take offense, but no, but I mean, but you know, you don't have to say please and thank you anymore. I mean, you can converse with a robot. If you're on, you know, a lot of customer support sites right now are actually using chatbot technology, and you know, whether or not you know it, you may interact differently if you did or if you didn't, but over time, it will become more ubiquitous for us, and we will be interacting more and more with computers, and we won't know the difference. It's the Turing machine, right? And once that happens, what are the impacts of kids growing up, and what are the impacts of having that conversation that you know is different than with a real human? And we're going to talk a little bit about empathy here in a minute. So I'm kind of scooting through this so that you guys can get to our drinks. I would say it's not just you. I'll be right there with you. Let's talk about some predictions, and these are solely mine. These are not Beeline's predictions. Doug Leby, our CEO, probably doesn't agree with everything, although he should. So autonomous cars will become the norm by 2025, and I didn't just pluck that out of the sky. I'm on a board with Cisco and MIT and a bunch of other companies, and the data does show that autonomous cars will become the norm. Now, there's a lot of regulation around that.
What level of automation? Because the 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, is that based on the federal regulations that they put out? Talk about the different levels of regulation. What level do you think will be the norm by 2025?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, that's a really good question, and I apologize. I don't know. But I'll give you an example of what I have seen. So I was the CTO for Colorado when medical marijuana came online, and when it was passed and then it was actually in law, and the police were really, really upset because it was actually legal to buy it, but it was illegal to put it in your car. It's true. So they were like, what do? We stop somebody, they legally bought it, but it's actually, the laws are still on the books. So I think to your point, there's going to be a lot of drip that has to happen, and I think because of the impact of autonomous cars, the impact to our society, I think they'll be smarter about how it's regulated, to be perfectly honest. Insurance, I mean, who's liable? If you guys have seen, the Uber autonomous cars in Phoenix, I actually live in Sedona, Arizona, and there was an Uber autonomous car driving autonomously with a woman in the car, and she wasn't, she was supposed to be kind of the backup, and it killed a pedestrian, this woman who was walking her bike across, and it was dark. And now I did read some of the reports, and they said that probably anybody might have hit this woman. She wasn't in a crosswalk, and she was kind of in a dark spot, so it could have been that anybody did that. But it was, caused a hue and cry, right? Well, I mean, shit, people, automobile accidents are probably our number one, killer in the country, and autonomous cars have killed one person.
About the Teslas running into the crash barriers and killing people as autonomous cars killing people when they were under the roadside assist or the.
Well, but they also didn't pay attention on some level, right? I mean, so there's.
The cars were driving themselves and they drove into a barrier. There's been multiple self-driving fatalities, not just one.
Okay, sorry, then multiple, but a hell of a lot less than every day. Let me just put it that way, because there's fewer of them, so fair. But I guess I'm just saying that they've already proven that they're probably safer than human drivers for the most part, because we're really distracted, right? And they're not. So I do believe over time that they will become better at it than we will. I think that also, if you want, have a robot watch your kid, that robot's never going to sleep, but you might if you're really tired, right? I mean, so there's a lot of things I think that can happen there. But fair. Internet economics will shift dramatically in the next 10 years. So think about, if you think about Alexa and Google Home and Siri, et cetera, think about the fact that if you're conversing with a chatbot, you're not online anymore. And so back to my DoubleClick days of advertising, what happens there? If you don't get served up a bunch of ads anymore, there's a huge economic shift that's going to happen there. Now, people thought it was going to happen with mobile, and it didn't happen with mobile. If you remember, I mean, I pay the extra $2.99 every time to get rid of all those ads, right? We all do. It's not sustainable. And the ad industry hasn't really had massive effect, but I think over time that is going to shift dramatically. DoubleClick was the one, when I was there, who said, we're going to disrupt the advertising space. And the advertisers who bought their media every year, and they bought, they knew every year exactly where their ads were going to go. They knew which radio spots were going, where they were going in TV. And DoubleClick came in and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually make it real time, and you're going to bid on it. And the advertisers were going like, no, that's not going to happen. Well, it did happen, right? The internet economy is going to have to shift, and we're not going to all be online like we are today, and we're not going to all have a computer, or we're not going to all have a smartphone. It's going to be different. And how's that going to change our world? Every job in government in the next decade will transform due to AI and ML. We just talked a little bit about, briefly about what, are we going to have to regulate things like if someone is trying to change your mood, or if someone is serving you ads to change your vote, what is that impact to the world? We do have some laws on books, but it's going to be different. The other thing that's very interesting, I think, is the legal world, where if you're a paralegal right now, you're probably a little scared for your job, because normally what happens if there's some kind of a judicial research that has to happen, and my sister was an attorney for many years, was a paralegal and some other lawyers would have to go out and find a bunch of documents and look at legal precedents, and they would have to come back and say, here's kind of the precedents in the judicial world. They would get through about 1% of all the documents out there. Now, through artificial intelligence, they can get through 100% of the documents that are out there, and they can do it a lot faster. So it's really changing the way that we think about legal things, and there's a whole much, how many artifacts does government have out there? And probably they don't even know it. And I can tell you, I was a CTO for Colorado, and we don't know how many are out there, and it's a bunch. We just talked a lot about conversational interfaces. I think they'll overtake traditional keyboard interfaces, and I think that's coming probably sooner than later. As an industry, we need to really think about how that impacts us and how we think about technology and software. Robots will discover empathy. I love this one because we're already starting to see customer service, chatbots out there that really interact with us like humans. I mean, there's a lot of them that are actually starting to get really smart, but they don't do well with sarcasm. They don't. So if we were dating and I said, yeah, I'm happy that you're going out to dinner with your drinking buddies, the computer would be like, yay, that's great, she's happy. But you know that I'm not, right? So it's very, very so there are certain human things that robots are going to fail at, and it's going to be very interesting to see over time how we solve that problem, because empathy is really hard to figure out, and sarcasm is super hard. Large corporations will become smaller with swarms of temporary teams. Now, this isn't because I work at Beeline, but maybe kind of a little bit. But I do believe that we are, when you think about the fact that corporations and what could go wrong. So I'm a corporation, and in good times I'm going to hire a lot of people, and in bad times I'm going to fire them all. What could go wrong there with my brand, right? I mean, it happens all the time. It's ridiculous when you see stuff, Microsoft lays off 10,000 people. It's a terrible way for us all to work, right? And it causes angst, and it causes a lot of problems. So I really do believe that there's going to start being projects that are going to be swarmed and be able to be completed. Kaggle.com, are you guys familiar with Kaggle? Great data science website, and they have competitions, and sometimes some of these competitions are worth like $1 million. I think Mercedes has one going on right now that literally the purse money is $1 million. And so what you do is you get your team, or you if you're that good, and you submit a proposal, or you submit your algorithms, and you try to win the $1 million. The projects are very, very succinct. They have a start and end date. They're very well defined. The data is very well defined. I mean, and the outcome is very well defined. And so it's pretty easy to put together a team. But if you think about it, all the risk for that lies in that team. And Mercedes doesn't have any risk in it, really. And so normally, if Mercedes was going to say, hey, we're going to put together this Tiger team, and we're going to solve this problem that we have, and I can't even remember what the competition is, but we're going to solve this big problem that we have, they would have to do background check. Who are these people, right? Let's do background checks on them. Do they all work together? Do they collaborate? None of that is relevant in Kaggle.com. All it is here's my project, here's my end date, here's my the information that you need to make a successful project. Go. It'll be interesting to see where that takes us, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do a lot better. Technology will become ubiquitous, like math. Reading, writing, arithmetic. I mean, it's ridiculous that we don't have technology. We are all technologists at some level, and especially in this room, right? And I was talking to this other lady who was writing a book, and she asked me. She said, "What is the biggest problem that we have for women in technology, for sure, but just in general in technology?" And I said, it's not a requirement in education anymore. It should be a requirement when you're in kindergarten, right? You should start really getting under the technology umbrella, because it's taking over our world. Everybody has to know technology at some level, and yet we're not teaching it that way. So and I told her, I said, probably one of the biggest barriers is if you're a kid and you go home at night and you ask, Chris Stoner, your daddy, to help you with a math problem, he can probably do it, right? Well, he probably can't, but he may not be able to. No, but I mean, but you can help him with reading, you can help him with writing. Can you help him, if you're not in this room and you're not a technology person, could you help them with a technology problem? Probably not. And a lot of parents struggle with that. And so she actually changed, based on our conversation, she was going to change the book to be kind of slanted toward parents, like, here's how to get your kid involved in technology, and here's where you can find some support when your kid comes home with technology questions, because you can't help them, right? We need to put it in the classroom, like now. Personal data will become a commodity and monetizable. So we have all this data, and for years, right, we've all been giving it away, right? And we all know that. How many people are familiar with GDPR? Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, but it's actually going to be our future, right? California is probably going to pass a law this year, is my guess, or very soon. That's very much like GDPR. And what GDPR does is it is in the European world is, it's very much a privacy law, and it basically says that you own your data. You personally own your data. So why can't we monetize that? Facebook's making a, sorry, I told Pete, I said, I'm going to cuss. I am going to cuss. And he goes, that's okay. Facebook's making a shit ton of, money off you, right? Why can't we monetize that? And I think that's going to come. And I would say, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, where, if you want to give up more data, you should get paid for that, right? You should get something out of it. Every successful company will become a data company. And 10 years ago, we were saying, every company is a technology company. Name one company, even your landscaper or anybody that you work with, who doesn't use technology. It's really hard to find. It's even hard to find in third world countries these days. It's hard to find, a place on Earth that isn't using technology at some level. So we've all become a technology company. Okay, now we all have to become a data company. And I say that to this room of technology colleagues because I think a lot of times we don't think about that. As technologists, we don't necessarily think about in terms of how can I use data to solve this problem, as opposed to creating some kind of bullshit process that somebody is going to hate as soon as they get a hold of it, right? I want something to be really super simple. I want it to be that text box or that Alexa question. And how can we leverage data under the covers to make that a reality? So I would challenge you all to think, hopefully, a little bit differently. And then my number one is artificially intelligent geeks will take over the world. Probably not. But I thought I would throw that out there as kind of the last thing, because hopefully I have given you a little bit of something to think about. My best success would be if you leave here and over cocktails you do at least on some level have a conversation about our future, because I think it's changing and I think it's a pretty cool place to be. With that, I appreciate you guys very much for having me. Thank you.